the deep darkness beneath the Earth awaits us. In the previous chapter, Professor Lidenbrock, young Axel, and their guide Hans began an impossible journey, a descent through a volcano, heading straight into the heart of the planet. You are watching a video on the Good Stories channel. Please subscribe and like to support the channel, thank you. Are you ready? Because right now, we continue the journey to the center of the Earth, part 3, where every step may lead to wonder or to destruction. But what lies ahead is more than stone, shadows, and danger. It is secrets buried for millions of years, visions no one would believe, and moments powerful enough to shake the human mind. It must in all truth be confessed, things as yet had gone on well, and I should have acted in bad taste to have complained. If the true medium of our difficulties did not increase, it was within the range of possibility that we might ultimately reach the end of our journey. Then what glory would be ours? I began in the newly aroused ardor of my soul to speak enthusiastically to the professor. Well, was I serious? The whole state in which we existed was a mystery, and it was impossible to know whether or not I was in earnest. For several days after our memorable halt, the slopes became more rapid, some were even of a most frightful character, almost vertical, so that we were forever going down into the solid interior mass. During some days, we actually descended 1.5 leagues, even 2 leagues towards the center of the Earth. The descents were sufficiently perilous, and while we were engaged in them we learned fully to appreciate the marvelous coolness of our guide, Hans. Without him we should have been wholly lost. The grave and impassible Icelander devoted himself to us with the most incomprehensible sang-froid and ease. And, thanks to him, many a dangerous pass was got over, where, but for him, we should inevitably have stuck fast. His silence increased every day. I think that we began to be influenced by this peculiar trait in his character. It is certain that the inanimate objects by which you are surrounded have a direct action on the brain. It must be that a man who shuts himself up between 4 walls must lose the faculty of associating ideas and words. How many persons condemned to the horrors of solitary confinement have gone mad simply because the thinking faculties have lain dormant? During the 2 weeks that followed our last interesting conversation, there occurred nothing worthy of being especially recorded. I have, while writing these memoirs, taxed my memory in vain for one incident of travel during this particular period, but the next event to be related is terrible indeed. Its very memory, even now, makes my soul shudder and my blood run cold. It was on the 7th of August. Our constant and successive descents had taken us quite 30 leagues into the interior of the Earth. That is to say that there were above us 30 leagues, nearly 100 miles, of rocks and oceans and continents and towns, to say nothing of living inhabitants. We were in a southeasterly direction, about 200 leagues from Iceland. On that memorable day the tunnel had begun to assume an almost horizontal course. I was on this occasion walking on in front. My uncle had charge of one of the Ruhmkorff coils. I had possession of the other. By means of its light I was busy examining the different layers of granite. I was completely absorbed in my work. Suddenly halting and turning round, I found that I was alone. Well, thought I to myself, I have certainly been walking too fast, or else Hans and my uncle have stopped to rest. The best thing I can do is to go back and find them. Luckily, there is very little ascent to tire me. I accordingly retraced my steps and, while doing so, walked for at least 1/4 hour. Rather uneasy, I paused and looked eagerly around. Not a living soul. I called aloud, no reply. My voice was lost amid the myriad cavernous echoes it aroused. I began for the first time to feel seriously uneasy. A cold shiver shook my whole body, and perspiration, chill and terrible, burst upon my skin. I must be calm, I said, speaking aloud, as boys whistle to drive away fear. There can be no doubt that I shall find my companions. There cannot be 2 roads. It is certain that I was considerably ahead. All I have to do is to go back. Having come to this determination, I ascended the tunnel for at least half an hour, unable to decide if I had ever seen certain landmarks before. Every now and then I paused to discover if any loud appeal was made to me, well knowing that in that dense and intensified atmosphere I should hear it a long way off. But no, the most extraordinary silence reigned in this immense gallery. Only the echoes of my own footsteps could be heard. At last I stopped. I could scarcely realize the fact of my isolation. I was quite willing to think that I had made a mistake, but not that I was lost. If I had made a mistake, I might find my way. If lost, I shuddered to think of it. Come, come, said I to myself, since there is only one road, and they must come by it, we shall at last meet. All I have to do is still to go upwards. Perhaps, however, not seeing me, and forgetting I was ahead, they may have gone back in search of me. Still, even in this case, if I make haste, I shall get up to them. There can be no doubt about the matter, but as I spoke these last words aloud, it would have been quite clear to any listener had there been one that I was by no means convinced of the fact. Moreover, in order to associate together these simple ideas and to reunite them under the form of reasoning, required some time. I could not all at once bring my brain to think, then another dread doubt fell upon my soul. After all, was I ahead? Of course I was. Hans was no doubt following behind, preceded by my uncle. I perfectly recollected his having stopped for a moment to strap his baggage on his shoulder. I now remembered this trifling detail. It was, I believe, just at that very moment that I had determined to continue my route. Again, thought I, reasoning as calmly as was possible, there is another sure means of not losing my way, a thread to guide me through the labyrinthine subterraneous retreat, one which I had forgotten, my faithful river. This course of reasoning roused my drooping spirits, and I resolved to resume my journey without further delay. No time was to be lost. It was at this moment that I had reason to bless the thoughtfulness of my uncle, when he refused to allow the eider hunter to close the orifices of the hot spring, that small fissure in the great mass of granite. This beneficent spring, after having saved us from thirst during so many days, would now enable me to regain the right road. Having come to this mental decision, I made up my mind, before I started upwards, that ablution would certainly do me a great deal of good. I stopped to plunge my hands and forehead in the pleasant water of the Hansbach stream, blessing its presence as a certain consolation. Conceive my horror and stupefaction. I was treading a hard, dusty, shingly road of granite. The stream on which I reckoned had wholly disappeared. No words in any human language can depict my utter despair. I was literally buried alive, with no other expectation before me but to die in all the slow, horrible torture of hunger and thirst. Mechanically I crawled about, feeling the dry and arid rock. Never to my fancy had I ever felt anything so dry. But I frantically asked myself, how had I lost the course of the flowing stream? There could be no doubt it had ceased to flow in the gallery in which I now was. Now I began to understand the cause of the strange silence which prevailed when last I tried if any appeal from my companions might perchance reach my ear. It so happened that when I first took an imprudent step in the wrong direction, I did not perceive the absence of the all-important stream. It was now quite evident that when we halted, another tunnel must have received the waters of the little torrent, and that I had unconsciously entered a different gallery. To what unknown depths had my companions gone? Where was I? How to get back? Clue or landmark? There was absolutely none. My feet left no signs on the granite and shingle. My brain throbbed with agony as I tried to discover the solution of this terrible problem. My situation, after all sophistry and reflection, had finally to be summed up in three awful words: lost. Lost, lost, lost at a depth which, to my finite understanding, appeared to be immeasurable. These 30 leagues of the crust of the earth weighed upon my shoulders like the globe on the shoulders of Atlas. I felt myself crushed by the awful weight. It was indeed a position to drive the sanest man to madness. I tried to bring my thoughts back to the things of the world so long forgotten. It was with the greatest difficulty that I succeeded in doing so. Hamburg, the house on the Königstrasse, my dear cousin Gretchen, all that world, which had before vanished like a shadow, floated before my now vivid imagination. There they were before me, but how unreal. Under the influence of a terrible hallucination, I saw all the incidents of our journey pass before me like the scenes of a panorama. The ship and its inmates, Iceland, M. Fridriksson, and the great summit of Mount Sneffels. I said to myself that, if in my position I retained the most faint and shadowy outline of a hope, it would be a sure sign of approaching delirium. It were better to give way wholly to despair. In fact, did I but reason with calmness and philosophy, what human power was there in existence able to take me back to the surface of the earth? Who could enable me to find my road and regain my companions? Insensate folly and madness to entertain even a shadow of hope. "Oh, uncle," was my despairing cry. This was the only word of reproach which came to my lips. When I at last began to resign myself to the fact that no further aid was to be expected from man, and knowing that I was utterly powerless to do anything for my own salvation, I kneeled with earnest fervor and asked assistance from heaven. The remembrance of my innocent childhood, the memory of my mother, known only in my infancy, came welling forth from my heart. I had recourse to prayer, and little as I had a right to be remembered by him whom I had forgotten in the hour of prosperity, and whom I so tardily invoked, I prayed earnestly and sincerely. This renewal of my youthful faith brought about a much greater amount of calm, and I was enabled to concentrate all my strength and intelligence on the terrible realities of my unprecedented situation. I had about me that which I had at first wholly forgotten: 3 days' provisions. Moreover, my water bottle was quite full nevertheless. The one thing which it was impossible to do was to remain alone. Try to find my companions I must, at any price. By doing this with care and coolness, I must reach the point where I had turned away from the rippling stream. I must find the fatal bifurcation or fork. Once the river at my feet, I could, at all events, regain the awful crater of Mount Sneffels. After a slight meal and a draught of water, I rose like a giant refreshed. Leaning heavily on my pole, I began the ascent of the gallery. The slope was very rapid and rather difficult, but I advanced hopefully and carefully, like a man who at last is making his way out of a forest. During one whole hour nothing happened to check my progress. As I advanced, I tried to recollect the shape of the tunnel, to recall to my memory certain projections of rocks, to persuade myself that I had followed certain winding routes before, but no one particular sign could I bring to mind, and I was soon forced to allow that this gallery would never take me back to the point at which I had separated myself from my companions. It was absolutely without issue, a mere blind alley in the earth. The moment at length came when, facing the solid rock, I knew my fate, and fell inanimate on the arid floor. To describe the horrible state of despair and fear into which I then fell would now be vain and impossible. My last hope, the courage which had sustained me, drooped before the sight of this pitiless granite rock. Lost in a vast labyrinth, the sinuosities of which spread in every direction, without guide, clue or compass, I knew it was a vain and useless task to attempt flight. All that remained to me was to lie down and die. To lie down and die, the most cruel and horrible of deaths. In my state of mind, the idea came into my head that one day perhaps, when my fossil bones were found, their discovery might give rise to solemn discussions. I tried to cry aloud, but hoarse, hollow, and inarticulate sounds alone could make themselves heard through my parched lips. I literally panted for breath. In the midst of all these horrible sources of anguish and despair, a new horror took possession of my soul. My lamp, by falling down, had got out of order. I had no means of repairing it. Its light was already becoming paler, and soon would expire. With a strange sense of resignation and despair, I watched the luminous current in the coil getting less and less. A procession of shadows moved flashing along the granite wall. I scarcely dared to lower my eyelids, fearing to lose the last spark of this fugitive light. At last, one final trembling flame remained in the lamp. I followed it with all my power of vision. I gasped for breath. I concentrated upon it all the power of my soul, as upon the last scintillation of light I was ever destined to see. A wild and plaintive cry escaped my lips, unearthed during the most profound and comparatively complete darkness. Light never allows a complete destruction and extinction of its power. In this place nothing, the absolute obscurity made me blind in every sense. My head was now wholly lost. I raised my arms, trying the effects of the feeling in getting against the cold stone wall. It was painful in the extreme. Madness must have taken possession of me. I began to run, to fly, rushing at haphazard in this inextricable labyrinth. Several hours passed in this way. After a long time, having utterly exhausted my strength, I fell a heavy inert mass along the side of the tunnel and lost consciousness. When at last I came back to a sense of life and being, my face was wet, but wet, as I soon knew, with tears. How long this state of insensibility lasted, it is quite impossible for me now to say. I had no means left to me of taking any account of time. Never since the creation of the world had such a solitude as mine existed. I was completely abandoned. After my fall, I lost much blood. I felt myself flooded with the life-giving liquid. My first sensation was perhaps a natural one. Why was I not dead? Because I was alive. There was something left to do. I tried to make up my mind to think no longer. As far as I was able, I drove away all ideas, and utterly overcome by pain and grief, I crouched against the granite wall. I just commenced to feel the fainting coming on again, and the sensation that this was the last struggle before complete annihilation when, on a sudden, a violent uproar reached my ears. It had some resemblance to the prolonged rumbling voice of thunder, and I clearly distinguished sonorous voices, lost one after the other, in the distant depths of the gulf. Whence came this noise? Naturally, it was to be supposed from new phenomena which were taking place in the bosom of Mother Earth, the explosion of some gaseous vapors, or the fall of some solid, of the granitic or other rock. Again I listened with deep attention. I was extremely anxious to hear if this strange and inexplicable sound was likely to be renewed. A whole quarter of an hour elapsed in painful expectation. Deep and solemn silence reigned in the tunnel, so still that I could hear the beatings of my own heart. I waited with a strange kind of hopefulness. Suddenly my ear, which leaned accidentally against the wall, appeared to catch, as it were, the faintest echo of a sound. I thought that I heard vague, incoherent and distant voices. I quivered all over with excitement and hope. It must be hallucination, I cried. It cannot be, it is not true. But no. By listening more attentively, I really did convince myself that what I heard was truly the sound of human voices. To make any meaning out of the sound, however, was beyond my power. I was too weak even to hear distinctly. Still, it was a positive fact that someone was speaking. Of that I was quite certain. There was a moment of fear. A dread fell upon my soul that it might be my own words brought back to me by a distant echo. Perhaps without knowing it, I might have been crying aloud. I resolutely closed my lips and once more placed my ear to the huge granite wall. Yes, for certain, it was in truth the sound of human voices. I now, by the exercise of great determination, dragged myself along the sides of the cavern until I reached a point where I could hear more distinctly. But though I could detect the sound, I could only make out uncertain, strange, and incomprehensible words. They reached my ear as if they had been spoken in a low tone, murmured, as it were, afar off. At last, I made out the word "forlorad," repeated several times in a tone betokening great mental anguish and sorrow. What could this word mean, and who was speaking it? It must be either my uncle or the guide Hans. If, therefore, I could hear them, they must surely be able to hear me. "Help!" I cried at the top of my voice. "Help! I am dying!" I then listened with scarcely a breath. I panted for the slightest sound in the darkness, a cry, a sigh, a question. But silence reigned supreme. No answer came. You are watching a video on the Good Stories channel. Please subscribe and like to support the channel, thank you. In this way some minutes passed. A whole flood of ideas flashed through my mind. I began to fear that my voice, weakened by sickness and suffering, could not reach my companions who were in search of me. It must be they, I cried. Who else could by any possibility be buried 100 miles below the level of the earth? The mere supposition was preposterous. I began, therefore, to listen again with the most breathless attention. As I moved my ears along the side of the place I was in, I found a mathematical point, as it were, where the voices appeared to attain their maximum of intensity. The word "forlorad" again distinctly reached my ear. Then came again that rolling noise like thunder which had awakened me out of torpor. I begin to understand, I said to myself. It is not through the solid mass that the sound reaches my ears. The walls are of solid granite, and the most fearful explosion would not make uproar enough to penetrate them. The sound must come along the gallery itself. The place I was in must possess some peculiar acoustic properties of its own. Again I listened, and this time, yes, this time, I heard my name distinctly pronounced, cast as it were into space. It was my uncle, the professor, who was speaking. He was in conversation with the guide, and the word which had so often reached my ears, "forlorad," was a Danish expression. Then I understood it all. In order to make myself heard, I too must speak as it were along the side of the gallery, which would carry the sound of my voice, just as the wire carries the electric fluid from point to point. But there was no time to lose. If my companions were only to remove a few feet from where they stood, the acoustic effect would be over. My whispering gallery would be destroyed. I again therefore crawled towards the wall and said as clearly and distinctly as I could, "Uncle Hardwick." I then awaited a reply. Sound does not possess the property of travelling with such extreme rapidity. Besides, the density of the air at that depth was far from adding to the rapidity of circulation. Several seconds elapsed, appearing ages to me, and these words reached my eager ears and moved my wildly beating heart. "Harry, my boy, is that you?" A short delay between question and answer. "Yes, yes. Where are you? Lost. And your lamp?" "Out. But the guiding stream is lost. Keep your courage, Harry. We will do our best." "One moment, my uncle," I cried. "I have no longer strength to answer your questions. But for heaven's sake, do you continue to speak to me?" Absolute silence, I felt, would be annihilation. "Keep up your courage," said my uncle. "As you are so weak, do not speak. We have been searching for you in all directions, both upwards and downwards." I had begun to give over all hope, and you can never know what bitter tears I have shed. At last, supposing you to be still on the road beside the Hansbach, we again descended, firing off guns as signals. Now that we have found you, and our voices reach each other, it may be a long time before we actually meet, but do not despair. It is something gained even to hear each other. While he was speaking, my brain was at work reflecting. An undefined hope, vague and shapeless as yet, made my heart beat wildly. First, it was necessary to know one thing, the distance between us. I leaned my head against the wall, almost touching it with my lips, and spoke again. "Uncle, my boy," he answered. "It is of the utmost consequence that we should know how far we are asunder. That is not difficult. You have your chronometer at hand. Certainly, pronounce my name, noting exactly the second at which you speak. I will reply as soon as I hear your words, and you will then note exactly the moment at which my reply reaches you." "Very good. And the mean time between my question and your answer will be the time occupied by my voice in reaching you." "That is exactly what I mean, uncle," I replied. "Are you ready?" "Yes. Make ready." "I am about to pronounce your name." I applied my ear close to the sides of the cavernous gallery, and as soon as the word Harry reached my ear, I turned round and, placing my lips to the wall, repeated the sound. 40 seconds, said my uncle. There has elapsed 40 seconds. The sound, therefore, takes 20 seconds to ascend. Now, allowing 1,020 feet for every second, we have 20,000 for 100 feet, a league and a half and 1/8. These words fell on my soul like a kind of death knell. "A league and a half," I muttered in a low and despairing voice. "It shall be got over, my boy," cried my uncle in a cheery tone. "Depend on us." "But do you know whether to ascend or descend?" I asked faintly enough. "We have to descend, and I will tell you why. You have reached a vast open space, a kind of bare crossroad, from which galleries diverge in every direction. That in which you are now lying must necessarily bring you to this point, for it appears that all these mighty fissures, these fractures of the globe's interior, radiate from the vast cavern which we at this moment occupy. Rouse yourself, then, have courage and continue your route. Walk if you can, if not drag yourself along, slide, if nothing else is possible. The slope must be rather rapid and you will find strong arms to receive you at the end of your journey. Make a start, like a good fellow." These words served to rouse some kind of courage in my sinking frame. "Farewell for the present, good uncle. I am about to take my departure. As soon as I start, our voices will cease to commingle. Farewell, then, until we meet again. Adieu, Harry, until we say welcome." Such were the last words which reached my anxious ears before I commenced my weary and almost hopeless journey. This wonderful and surprising conversation through the vast mass of the earth's labyrinth, these words exchanged, the speakers, about 5 miles apart, ended with hopeful and pleasant expressions. I breathed one more prayer to heaven. I sent up words of thanksgiving, believing in my inmost heart that he had led me to the only place where the voices of my friends could reach my ears. This astounding acoustic mystery is explainable by natural laws. It arose from the conductibility of the rock. There are many instances of this singular propagation of sound not perceptible in its less immediate positions. In the interior gallery of St. Paul's and amid the curious caverns in Sicily, these phenomena are observable. The most marvelous of them all is known as the ear of Dionysius. These memories of the past, of my early reading and studies, came fresh to my thoughts. Moreover, I began to reason that if at such a distance we could communicate, no serious obstacle could exist. All I had to do was to follow the direction whence the sound had reached me. And logically putting it, I must reach him if my strength did not fail. I accordingly rose to my feet. I soon found, however, that I could not walk. I must drag myself along. The slope, as I expected, was very rapid, but I allowed myself to slip down. Soon the rapidity of the descent began to assume frightful proportions, and menaced a fearful fall. I clutched at the sides. I grasped at projections of rocks. I threw myself backwards. All in vain. My weakness was so great I could do nothing to save myself. Suddenly earth failed me. I was first launched into a dark and gloomy void. I then struck against the projecting asperities of a vertical gallery, a perfect well. My head bounded against a pointed rock, and I lost all knowledge of existence. As far as I was concerned, death had claimed me for his own. When I returned to the consciousness of existence, I found myself surrounded by a kind of semi-obscurity, lying on some thick and soft coverlets. My uncle was watching, his eyes fixed intently on my countenance, a grave expression on his face, a tear in his eye. At the first sigh which struggled from my bosom, he took hold of my hand. When he saw my eyes open and fix themselves upon his, he uttered a loud cry of joy. He lives, yes, my good uncle," I whispered. "My dear boy," continued the grim professor, clasping me to his heart, "you are saved." I was deeply and unaffectedly touched by the tone in which these words were uttered, and even more by the kindly care which accompanied them. The professor, however, was one of those men who must be severely tried in order to induce any display of affection or gentle emotion. At this moment our friend Hans, the guide, joined us. He saw my hand in that of my uncle, and taciturn as he was, his eyes beamed with lively satisfaction. "God dag," he said. "Good day, Hans, good day," I replied in as hearty a tone as I could assume. "And now, uncle, that we are together, tell me where we are." I have lost all idea of our position, as of everything else. "Tomorrow, Harry, tomorrow," he replied. "Today you are far too weak. Your head is surrounded with bandages and poultices that must not be touched. Sleep, my boy, sleep, and tomorrow you will know all that you require." "But," I cried, "let me know what o'clock it is, what day it is." "It is now 11 o'clock at night, and this is once more Sunday. It is now the 9th of the month of August. And I distinctly prohibit you from asking any more questions until the 10th of the same." I was, if the truth were told, very weak indeed, and my eyes soon closed involuntarily. I did require a good night's rest, and I went off reflecting at the last moment that my perilous adventure in the interior of the earth, in total darkness, had lasted for days. On the morning of the next day, at my awakening, I began to look around me. My sleeping place, made of all our travelling bedding, was in a charming grotto adorned with magnificent stalagmites, glittering in all the colours of the rainbow, the floor of soft and silvery sand. A dim obscurity prevailed, no torch, no lamp was lighted, and yet certain unexplained beams of light penetrated from without, and made their way through the opening of the beautiful grotto. I, moreover, heard a vague and indefinite murmur, like the ebb and flow of waves upon a strand, and sometimes I verily believed I could hear the sighing of the wind. I began to believe that, instead of being awake, I must be dreaming. Surely my brain had not been affected by my fall, and all that occurred during the last 24 hours was not the frenzied visions of madness. And yet after some reflection, a trial of my faculties, I came to the conclusion that I could not be mistaken. Eyes and ears could not surely both deceive me. "It is a ray of the blessed daylight," I said to myself, "which has penetrated through some mighty fissure in the rocks. But what is the meaning of this murmur of waves, this unmistakable moaning of the salt sea billows? I can hear, too, plainly enough, the whistling of the wind, but can I be altogether mistaken? If my uncle, during my illness, has but carried me back to the surface of the earth, Has he, on my account, given up his wondrous expedition, or in some strange manner has it come to an end? I was puzzling my brain over these and other questions when the professor joined me. "Good day, Harry," he cried in a joyous tone. "I fancy you are quite well." "I am very much better," I replied, actually sitting up in my bed. "I knew that would be the end of it, as you slept both soundly and tranquilly. Hans and I have each taken turn to watch, and every hour we have seen visible signs of amelioration." "You must be right, uncle," was my reply, "for I feel as if I could do justice to any meal you could put before me. You shall eat, my boy, you shall eat. The fever has left you. Our excellent friend Hans has rubbed your wounds and bruises with I know not what ointment, of which the Icelanders alone possess the secret. And they have healed your bruises in the most marvellous manner. Ah, he's a wise fellow is Master Hans." While he was speaking, my uncle was placing before me several articles of food, which I readily devoured. As soon as the first rage of hunger was appeased, I overwhelmed him with questions, to which he now no longer hesitated to give answers. I then learned, for the first time, that my providential fall had brought me to the bottom of an almost perpendicular gallery. As I came down, amidst a perfect shower of stones, the least of which falling on me would have crushed me to death, they came to the conclusion that I had carried with me an entire dislocated rock. Riding as it were on this terrible chariot, I was cast headlong into my uncle's arms, and into them I fell, insensible and covered with blood. "It is indeed a miracle," was the professor's final remark, "that you were not killed 1,000 times over. But let us take care never to separate, for surely we should risk never meeting again. Let us take care never again to separate." These words fell with a sort of chill upon my heart. The journey, then, was not over. I looked at my uncle with surprise and astonishment. My uncle, after an instant's examination of my countenance, said, "What is the matter, Harry? I want to ask you a very serious question. You say that I am all right in health." "Certainly you are, and all my limbs are sound and capable of new exertion." I asked, "Most undoubtedly, but what about my head?" was my next anxious question. "Well, your head, except that you have 1 or 2 contusions, is exactly where it ought to be on your shoulders," said my uncle, laughing. "Well, my own opinion is that my head is not exactly right. In fact, I believe myself slightly delirious." "What makes you think so?" "I will explain why I fancy I have lost my senses," I cried. "Have we not returned to the surface of Mother Earth?" "Certainly not. Then truly I must be mad, for do I not see the light of day? Do I not hear the whistling of the wind, and can I not distinguish the wash of a great sea? And that is all that makes you uneasy?" said my uncle with a smile. "Can you explain?" "I will not make any attempt to explain, for the whole matter is utterly inexplicable, but you shall see and judge for yourself. You will then find that geological science is as yet in its infancy and that we are doomed to enlighten the world. Let us advance." "Then," I cried eagerly, no longer able to restrain my curiosity. "Wait a moment, my dear Harry," he responded. "You must take precautions after your illness before going into the open air." "The open air, yes, my boy. I have to warn you that the wind is rather violent and I have no wish for you to expose yourself without necessary precautions, but I beg to assure you that I am perfectly recovered. Have just a little patience, my boy, or a lapse would be inconvenient to all parties. We have no time to lose as our approaching sea voyage may be of long duration." "Sea voyage?" I cried, more bewildered than ever. "Yes, you must take another day's rest, and we shall be ready to go on board by tomorrow," replied my uncle with a peculiar smile. Go on board, the words utterly astonished me. Go on board what and how? Had we come upon a river, a lake? Had we discovered some inland sea? Was a vessel lying at anchor in some part of the interior of the earth? My curiosity was worked up to the very highest pitch. My uncle made vain attempts to restrain me. At last he discovered that my feverish impatience would do more harm than good, and that the satisfaction of my wishes could alone restore me to a calm state of mind. He gave way. I dressed myself rapidly and then, taking the precaution to please my uncle of wrapping myself in one of the coverlets, I rushed out of the grotto. At first I saw absolutely nothing. My eyes, wholly unused to the effulgence of light, could not bear the sudden brightness, and I was compelled to close them. When I was able to reopen them, I stood still, far more stupefied than astonished. Not all the wildest effects of imagination could have conjured up such a scene. The sea, I cried. Yes, replied my uncle, in a tone of pardonable pride. The Central Sea, no future navigator will deny the fact of my having discovered it, and hence of acquiring a right of giving it a name. It was quite true. A vast, limitless expanse of water, the end of a lake if not of an ocean, spread before us, until it was lost in the distance. The shore, very much indented, consisted of beautiful soft golden sand. It was mixed with small shells, the long deserted home of some of the creatures of a past age. The waves broke incessantly and with a peculiarly sonorous murmur, to be found in underground localities. A slight frothy flake arose as the wind blew along the pellucid waters. Many a dash of spray was blown into my face. The mighty superstructure of rock which rose above to an inconceivable height left only a narrow opening, but where we stood, there was a large margin of strand. On all sides were capes and promontories and enormous cliffs, partially worn by the eternal breaking of the waves through countless ages. And as I gazed from side to side, the mighty rocks faded away like a fleecy film of cloud. It was in reality an ocean, with all the usual characteristics of an inland sea, only horribly wild, so rigid, cold and savage. One thing startled and puzzled me greatly. How was it that I was able to look upon that vast sheet of water instead of being plunged in utter darkness? The vast landscape before me was lit up like day, but there was wanting the splendid irradiation of the sun, the brightness of the stars. The pale cold illumination of the moon was not there. The illuminating power in this subterranean region, from its trembling and flickering character, its clear dry whiteness, its slight elevation of temperature, and its superiority to that of the moon, was evidently electric. It was something in the nature of the aurora borealis, only that its phenomena were constant and able to light up the whole of the ocean cabin. The tremendous vault above our heads, the sky, so to speak, appeared composed of a conglomeration of nebulous vapours in constant motion. One should originally have supposed that, under such atmospheric pressure as must exist in that place, the evaporation of water could not take place. And yet, from the action of some physical law, there were heavy and dense clouds rolling along that mighty vault, partially concealing the roof. Electric currents produced astonishing play of light and shade in the distance, especially around the heavier clouds. Deep shadows were cast beneath, and then suddenly, between two clouds, there would come a ray of unusual beauty and remarkable intensity. And yet it was not like the sun, for it gave no heat. The effect was sad and excruciatingly melancholy. Instead of a noble firmament of blue, studded with stars, there was above me a heavy roof of granite, which seemed to crush me. Gazing around, I began to think of the theory of the English captain. He compared the earth to a vast hollow sphere in the interior of which the air is retained in a luminous state by means of atmospheric pressure, while two stars, Pluto and Proserpine, circled there in their mysterious orbits. After all, suppose the old fellow was right? In truth, we were imprisoned, bound as it were, in a vast excavation. Its width it was impossible to make out. The shore on either hand widened rapidly until lost to sight. Its length was equally uncertain. A haze on the distant horizon bounded our view. As to its height, we could see that it must be many miles to the roof. Looking upward, it was impossible to discover where the stupendous roof began. The lowest of the clouds must have been floating at an elevation of 2,000 yards, owing to the extreme density of the air. I use the word cavern to give an idea of the place. I cannot describe its awful grandeur. Human language fails to convey an idea of its savage sublimity. Whether this singular vacuum had or had not been caused by the sudden cooling of the earth, I could not say. I had read of most wonderful and gigantic caverns, but none in any way like this. The great grotto of Guachara in Colombia, visited by the learned Humboldt. The vast and partially explored Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. What were these holes in the earth to that in which I stood, in speechless admiration, with its vapory clouds, its electric light, and the mighty ocean slumbering in its bosom? Imagination, not description, can alone give an idea of the splendor and vastness of the cave. I gazed at these marvels in profound silence. Words were utterly wanting. I seemed, as I stood upon that mysterious shore, as if I was some wandering inhabitant of a distant planet, present for the first time at the spectacle of terrestrial phenomena belonging to another existence. To give body to such new sensations would have required the coinage of new words. Here my feeble brain found itself wholly at fault. I looked on, I thought, I reflected, I admired, in a state of stupefaction not altogether unmingled with fear. The unexpected spectacle restored some colour to my pallid cheeks. I seemed to be actually getting better. Moreover, the vivacity of the dense atmosphere reanimated my body by inflating my lungs with unaccustomed oxygen. It will be readily conceived that after an imprisonment of 47 days in a dark and miserable tunnel, it was with infinite delight that I breathed this saline air. It was like the genial, reviving influence of the salt sea waves. My uncle had already got over the first surprise. With the Latin poet Horace, his idea was that not to admire is all the art I know, to make man happy and to keep him so. Well, he said, after giving me time thoroughly to appreciate the marvels of this underground sea, do you feel strong enough to walk up and down? Certainly, was my ready answer. Nothing would give me greater pleasure. Well then, my boy, he said, lean on my arm, and we will stroll along the beach. I accepted his offer eagerly, and we began to walk along the shores of this extraordinary lake. To our left were abrupt rocks, piled one upon the other, a stupendous titanic pile. Down their sides leapt innumerable cascades. At last, becoming limpid and murmuring streams, they were lost in the waters of the lake. Light vapours rose here and there, and floated in fleecy clouds from rock to rock, indicating hot springs, which also poured their superfluity into the vast reservoir at our feet. Among them I recognized our old and faithful stream, the Hansbach, which, lost in that wild basin, seemed as if it had been flowing since the creation of the world. We shall miss our excellent friend, I remarked, with a deep sigh. Said my uncle testily. What matters it? That or another, it is all the same. I thought the remark ungrateful, and felt almost inclined to say so. But I forbore. At this moment my attention was attracted by an unexpected spectacle. After we had gone about 500 yards, we turned a steep promontory. We found ourselves close to a lofty forest. It consisted of straight trunks with tufted tops, in shape like parasols. The air seemed to have no effect upon these trees which, in spite of a tolerable breeze, remained as still and motionless as if they had been petrified. I hastened forward. I could find no name for these singular formations. Did they not belong to the 2,000 and more known trees, or were we to make the discovery of a new growth? By no means. When we at last reached the forest, my surprise gave way to admiration. In truth, I was simply in the presence of a very ordinary product of the earth, of singular and gigantic proportions. My uncle unhesitatingly called them by their real names. It is only, he said, in his coolest manner, a forest of mushrooms. On close examination I found that he was not mistaken. Judge of the development attained by this product of damp hot soils. I had heard that the Lycoperdon giganteum reaches 9 feet in circumference, but here were white mushrooms nearly 40 feet high, with tops of equal dimensions. They grew in countless thousands. The light could not make its way through their massive substance, and beneath them reigned a gloomy and mystic darkness. Still I wished to go forward. The cold in the shades of this singular forest was intense. For nearly an hour we wandered in visible darkness. At length I left the spot, and once more returned to the shores of the lake, to light and comparative warmth. But the amazing vegetation of subterraneous land was not confined to gigantic mushrooms. New wonders awaited us at every step. Soon we came upon a mighty group of other trees, with discoloured leaves, the common humble trees of Mother Earth, of an exorbitant and phenomenal size, lycopods 100 feet high, flowering ferns as tall as pines, gigantic grasses. Astonishing, magnificent, splendid, cried my uncle. Here we have the flora of the second period. Behold the humble plants of our gardens, which in the first ages of the world were mighty trees. Look around you, my dear Harry. No botanist ever before gazed on such a sight. My uncle's enthusiasm, always a little more than was required, was now excusable. You are right, uncle, I remarked. Providence appears to have designed the preservation in this vast and mysterious hothouse of antediluvian plants to prove the sagacity of learned men in figuring them so marvelously on paper. Well said, my boy, very well said. It is indeed a mighty hothouse, but you would also be within the bounds of reason and common sense if you added that it is also a vast menagerie. I looked rather anxiously around. If the animals were as exaggerated as the plants, the matter would certainly be serious. A menagerie, doubtless. Look at the dust we are treading underfoot. Behold the bones with which the whole soil of the seashore is covered. Bones, I replied. Yes, certainly, the bones of antediluvian animals. I stooped and picked up singular remains, relics of a bygone age. It was easy to give a name to these gigantic bones, in some instances as big as trunks of trees. Here is, clearly, the lower jawbone of a mastodon, I cried. Here are the molars of the Dinotherium. Here is a leg bone which belonged to the Megatherium. You are right, uncle. It is indeed a menagerie. For the mighty animals to which these bones once belonged have lived and died on the shores of this subterranean sea, under the shadow of these plants. Look, yonder are whole skeletons, and yet, nephew, said my uncle, I do not understand the presence of such beasts in granite caverns, however vast and prodigious, was my reply. Why not? Said my uncle, with very much of his old professional impatience. Because it is well known that animal life only existed on Earth during the secondary period, when the sedimentary soil was formed by the alluviums, and thus replaced the hot and burning rocks of the primitive age. I have listened to you earnestly and with patience, Harry, he said, and I have a simple and clear answer. This itself is a sedimentary soil. How can that be at such enormous depth from the surface of the Earth? The fact can be explained both simply and geologically. At a certain period, the Earth consisted only of an elastic crust, liable to upward and downward movements in virtue of the law of attraction. It is very probable that many a landslip took place in those days, and that large portions of sedimentary soil were cast into huge and mighty chasms. Quite possible, I dryly remarked. But, uncle, if these antediluvian animals formerly lived in these subterranean regions, what then? What more likely than that one of these monsters may at this moment be concealed behind one of yonder mighty rocks? As I spoke, I looked keenly around, examining with care every point of the horizon. But nothing alive appeared to exist on these deserted shores. I now felt rather fatigued, and told my uncle so. The walk and excitement were too much for me in my weak state. I therefore seated myself at the end of a promontory, at the foot of which the waves broke in incessant rolls. I looked round a bay of vast granitic rocks. At the extreme end was a little port protected by huge pyramids of stones. A brig and 3 or 4 schooners might have lain there with perfect ease. So natural did it seem, that every minute I expected a vessel coming out under all sail and making for the open sea, under the influence of a warm southerly breeze. But the fantastic illusion never lasted more than a minute. We were the only living creatures in this subterranean world. During certain periods there was an utter cessation of wind, when a deeper silence fell upon the arid rocks. It seemed to hang like a leaden weight upon the waters of this singular ocean. I sought, amid the awful stillness, to penetrate through the distant fog, to tear down the veil which concealed the mysterious distance. What unspoken words were murmured by my trembling lips, what questions I wished to ask. Where did this sea end, to what did it lead? Should we ever be able to examine its distant shores? But my uncle had no doubts about the matter. He was convinced that our enterprise would in the end be successful. For my part, I was in a state of painful indecision. I desired to embark on the journey and to succeed, and still I feared the result. After we had passed an hour or more in silent contemplation of the wondrous spectacle, we rose and went down towards the bank on our way to the grotto, which I was not sorry to gain. After a slight repast, I sought refuge in slumber, and at length, after many and tedious struggles, sleep came over my weary eyes. On the morning of the next day, to my great surprise, I awoke completely restored. I thought a bath would be delightful after my long illness and sufferings. So, soon after rising, I went and plunged into the waters of this new Mediterranean. The bath was cool, fresh and invigorating. I came back to breakfast with an excellent appetite. Hans, our worthy guide, thoroughly understood how to cook such eatables as we were able to provide. He had both fire and water at discretion, so that he was enabled slightly to vary the weary monotony of our ordinary repast. Our morning meal was like a capital English breakfast, with coffee by way of a wind-up. And never had this delicious beverage been so welcome and refreshing. My uncle had sufficient regard for my state of health not to interrupt me in the enjoyment of the meal, but he was evidently delighted when I had finished. "Now then," said he, "come with me. It is the height of the tide, and I am anxious to study its curious phenomena." "What?" I cried, rising in astonishment. "Did you say the tide, uncle?" "Certainly I did. You do not mean to say," I replied, in a tone of respectful doubt, "that the influence of the sun and moon is felt here below." "And pray why not? Are not all bodies influenced by the law of universal attraction? Why should this vast underground sea be exempt from the general law, the rule of the universe? Besides, there is nothing like that which is proved and demonstrated. Despite the great atmospheric pressure down here, you will notice that this inland sea rises and falls with as much regularity as the Atlantic itself." As my uncle spoke, we reached the sandy shore and saw and heard the waves breaking monotonously on the beach. They were evidently rising. "This is truly the flood," I cried, looking at the water at my feet. "Yes, my excellent nephew," replied my uncle, rubbing his hands with the gusto of a philosopher, "and you see by these streaks of foam the tide rises 10 or 12 feet. It is indeed marvelous." "By no means," he responded. "On the contrary, it is quite natural. It may appear so in your eyes, my dear uncle," was my reply, "but all the phenomena of the place appear to me to partake of the marvelous. It is almost impossible to believe that which I see. Who in his wildest dreams could have imagined that, beneath the crust of our earth, there could exist a real ocean, with ebbing and flowing tides, with its changes of winds, and even its storms?" I for one should have laughed the suggestion to scorn. "But, Harry, my boy, why not?" inquired my uncle with a pitying smile. "Is there any physical reason in opposition to it?" "Well, if we give up the great theory of the central heat of the earth, I certainly can offer no reasons why anything should be looked upon as impossible. Then you will own," he added, "that the system of Sir Humphrey Davy is wholly justified by what we have seen." "I allow that it is," I answered, "and that point once granted, I certainly can see no reason for doubting the existence of seas and other wonders, even countries, in the interior of the globe. That is so, but of course these varied countries are uninhabited." "Well, I grant that it is more likely than not. Still, I do not see why this sea should not have given shelter to some species of unknown fish. Hitherto we have not discovered any, and the probabilities are rather against our ever doing so," observed the professor. I was losing my skepticism in the presence of these wonders. "Well, I am determined to solve the question. It is my intention to try my luck with my fishing line and hook." "Certainly. Make the experiment," said my uncle, pleased with my enthusiasm. "It will be proper to discover all the secrets of this extraordinary region." "But, after all, where are we now?" I asked. "All this time I have quite forgotten to ask you a question, which, doubtless, your philosophical instruments have long since answered." "Well," replied the professor, "from one point of view, we are 350 leagues from Iceland." "So much," was my exclamation. "I have gone over the matter several times, and I am sure not to have made a mistake of 500 yards, replied my uncle positively. "And as to the direction, are we still going to the southeast?" "Yes, with a western declination of 19 degrees, 42 minutes, just as it is above." "As for the inclination, I have discovered a very curious fact." "What may that be, uncle?" "Your information interests me." "Why, that the needle, instead of dipping towards the pole, has an upward tendency." "This proves," I cried, "that the great point of magnetic attraction lies somewhere between the surface of the earth and the spot we have succeeded in reaching." "Exactly, my observant nephew," exclaimed my uncle, elated and delighted, "and it is quite probable that if we succeed in getting toward the polar regions somewhere near the 73rd degree of latitude, where Sir James Ross discovered the magnetic pole, we shall behold the needle point directly upward. We have therefore discovered by analogy that this great center of attraction is not very deep." "Well," said I, rather surprised, "this discovery will astonish experimental philosophers." It was never suspected science, great, mighty, and in the end unerring, replied my uncle dogmatically, has fallen into many errors fortunate and useful as stepping stones to truth. After some further discussion, I turned to another matter. Have you any idea of the depth we have reached? We are now, continued the professor, exactly 35 leagues above 100 miles down into the interior of the Earth. So, said I, after measuring the distance on the map, we are now beneath the Scottish Highlands and have over our heads the lofty Grampian Hills. You are quite right, said the professor, laughing. It sounds very alarming, the weight being heavy, but the vault is solid and safe. The mighty architect of the universe has constructed it of solid materials. Man, even in his highest flights of imagination, never thought of such things. What are the finest arches of our bridges, what the vaulted roofs of our cathedrals, to that mighty dome above us, and beneath which floats an ocean with its storms and calms and tides. I admire it all as much as you can, uncle, and have no fear that our granite sky will fall upon our heads. But now, what are your future intentions? Are you not thinking of getting back to the surface? This was said more as a feeler than with any hope of success. Go back, nephew, cried my uncle in a tone of alarm. You are not surely thinking of anything so absurd or cowardly. No, my intention is to advance and continue our journey. We have as yet been singularly fortunate, and henceforth I hope we shall be more so. But, said I, how are we to cross yonder liquid plain? It is not my intention to leap into it head foremost, or even to swim across it, like Leander over the Hellespont. But as oceans are, after all, only great lakes, inasmuch as they are surrounded by land, so does it stand to reason that this central sea is circumscribed by granite surroundings. Doubtless, was my natural reply. Well, then, do you not think that once we reach the other end, we shall find some means of continuing our journey? Probably, but what extent do you allow to this internal ocean? Well, I should fancy it to extend about 40 or 50 leagues more or less, but even supposing this approximation to be a correct one, what then? My dear boy, we have no time for further discussion. We shall embark tomorrow. I looked around with surprise and incredulity. I could see nothing in the shape of boat or vessel. What? I cried. We are about to launch out upon an unknown sea, and where is the vessel? Well, my dear boy, it will not be exactly what you would call a vessel. For the present we must be content with a good and solid raft. A raft, I cried, incredulously. But down here a raft is as impossible of construction as a vessel, and I am at a loss to imagine. My good Harry, if you were to listen instead of talking so much, you would hear, said my uncle, waxing a little impatient. I should hear, yes, certain knocks with the hammer, which Hans is now employing to make the raft. He has been at work for many hours, making a raft, yes, but where has he found trees suitable for such a construction? He found the trees all ready to his hand. Come, and you shall see our excellent guide at work. More and more amazed at what I heard and saw, I followed my uncle like one in a dream. After a walk of about a quarter of an hour, I saw Hans at work on the other side of the promontory which formed our natural port. A few minutes more and I was beside him. To my great surprise, on the sandy shore lay a half-finished raft. It was made from beams of a very peculiar wood, and a great number of limbs, joints, boughs, and pieces lay about, sufficient to have constructed a fleet of ships and boats. I turned to my uncle, silent with astonishment and awe. Where did all this wood come from? What wood is it? Well, there is pine wood, fir, and the palms of the northern regions, mineralized by the action of the sea, he replied, sententiously. Can it be possible? Yes, said the learned professor. What you see is called fossil wood. But then, cried I, after reflecting for a moment, like the lignites, it must be as hard and as heavy as iron, and therefore will certainly not float. Sometimes that is the case. Many of these woods have become true anthracites, but others again have only undergone one phase of fossil transformation. But there is no proof like demonstration, added my uncle, picking one or two of these precious waifs and casting them into the sea. The piece of wood, after having disappeared for a moment, came to the surface and floated with wind and tide. Are you convinced? Said my uncle, with a self-satisfied smile. I am convinced, I cried, that what I see is incredible. The fact was that my journey into the interior of the Earth was rapidly changing all preconceived notions, preparing me day by day for the marvelous. I should not have been surprised to have seen a fleet of native canoes afloat upon that silent sea. The very next evening, thanks to the industry and ability of Hans, the raft was finished. It was about 10 feet long and 5 feet wide. The beams bound together with stout ropes were solid and firm, and once launched by our united efforts, the improvised vessel floated tranquilly upon the waters of what the professor had well named the Central Sea. On the 13th of August we were up betimes. There was no time to be lost. We now had to inaugurate a new kind of locomotion, which would have the advantage of being rapid and not fatiguing. A mast, made of 2 pieces of wood fastened together to give additional strength, a yard made from another one, the sail a linen sheet from our bed. We were fortunately in no want of cordage, and the whole on trial appeared solid and seaworthy. At 6 o'clock in the morning, when the eager and enthusiastic professor gave the signal to embark, the victuals, the luggage, all our instruments, our weapons, and a goodly supply of sweet water, which we had collected from springs in the rocks, were placed on the raft. Hans had, with considerable ingenuity, contrived a rudder, which enabled him to guide the floating apparatus with ease. He took the tiller, as a matter of course. The worthy man was as good a sailor as he was a guide and duck hunter. I then let go the painter which held us to the shore, the sail was brought to the wind, and we made a rapid offing. Our sea voyage had at length commenced, and once more we were making for distant and unknown regions. Just as we were about to leave the little port where the raft had been constructed, my uncle, who was very strong as to geographic nomenclature, wanted to give it a name, and among others, suggested mine. "Well," said I, "before you decide I have another to propose." "Well, out with it. I should like to call it Gretchen." "Port Gretchen will sound very well on our future map." "Well then, Port Gretchen let it be," said the professor. And thus the memory of my dear girl was attached to our adventurous expedition. When we left the shore, the wind was blowing from the northward and eastward. We went directly before the wind at a much greater speed than might have been expected from a raft. The dense layers of atmosphere at that depth had great propelling power. They acted upon the sail with considerable force. At the end of an hour, my uncle, who had been taking careful observations, was enabled to judge of the rapidity with which we moved. It was far beyond anything seen in the upper world. "If," he said, "we continue to advance at our present rate, we shall have travelled at least 30 leagues in 24 hours. With a mere raft this is an almost incredible velocity." I certainly was surprised, and without making any reply went forward upon the raft. You are watching a video on the Good Stories channel. Please subscribe and like to support the channel, thank you. Already the northern shore was fading away on the edge of the horizon. The 2 shores appeared to separate more and more, leaving a wide and open space for our departure. Before me I could see nothing but the vast and apparently limitless sea upon which we floated. We were the only living objects in sight. Huge and dark clouds cast their grey shadows below shadows, which seemed to crush that colourless and sullen water by their weight. Anything more suggestive of gloom and of regions of nether darkness I never beheld. Silvery rays of electric light, reflected here and there upon some small spots of water, brought up luminous sparkles in the long wake of our cumbrous bark. Presently we were wholly out of sight of land. Not a vestige could be seen, nor any indication of where we were going. So still and motionless did we seem without any distant point to fix our eyes on that. But for the phosphoric light at the wake of the raft I should have fancied that we were still and motionless. But I knew that we were advancing at a very rapid rate. About 12 o'clock in the day, vast collections of seaweed were discovered surrounding us on all sides. I was aware of the extraordinary vegetative power of these plants, which have been known to creep along the bottom of the great ocean and stop the advance of large ships, but never were seaweeds ever seen, so gigantic and wonderful as those of the Central Sea. I could well imagine how, seen at a distance, tossing and heaving on the summit of the billows, the long lines of algae have been taken for living things, fertile sources of belief in sea serpents. Our raft swept past great specimens of fucus or sirac, from 3,000 to 4,000 feet in length, immense, incredibly long, looking like snakes that stretched out far beyond our horizon. It afforded me great amusement to gaze on their variegated ribbon-like endless lengths, hour after hour passed without our coming to the termination of these floating weeds. If my astonishment increased, my patience was well nigh exhausted. What natural force could possibly have produced such abnormal and extraordinary plants? What must have been the aspect of the globe during the first centuries of its formation, when under the combined action of heat and humidity, the vegetable kingdom occupied its vast surface to the exclusion of everything else? These were considerations of never-ending interest for the geologist and the philosopher. All this while we were advancing on our journey, and at length night came. But as I had remarked the evening before, the luminous state of the atmosphere was in nothing diminished. Whatever was the cause, it was a phenomenon on whose duration we could calculate. As soon as our supper had been disposed of, and some little speculative conversation indulged in, I stretched myself at the foot of the mast, and presently went to sleep. Hans remained motionless at the tiller, allowing the raft to rise and fall on the waves. The wind being aft, and the sail square, all he had to do was to keep his oar in the centre. Ever since we had taken our departure from the newly named Port Gretchen, my worthy uncle had directed me to keep a regular log of our day's navigation. He gave instructions to put down even the most minute particulars, every interesting and curious phenomenon, the direction of the wind, our rate of sailing, the distance we went. In a word, every incident of our extraordinary voyage. From our log, therefore, I tell the story of our voyage on the Central Sea, Friday, August 14th, a steady breeze from the northwest. Raft progressing with extreme rapidity and going perfectly straight. Coast still dimly visible about 30 leagues to leeward. Nothing to be seen beyond the horizon in front. The extraordinary intensity of the light neither increases nor diminishes. It is singularly stationary, the weather remarkably fine. That is to say, the clouds have ascended very high and are light and fleecy, and surrounded by an atmosphere resembling silver infusion. Thermometer, +32 degrees centigrade. About 12 o'clock in the day, our guide Hans, having prepared and baited a hook, cast his line into the subterranean waters. The bait he used was a small piece of meat, by means of which he concealed his hook. Anxious as I was for a long time doomed to disappointment. Were these waters supplied with fish or not? That was the important question. No was my decided answer. Then there came a sudden and rather hard tug. Hans coolly drew it in, and with it a fish, which struggled violently to escape. "A fish," cried my uncle. "It is a sturgeon," I cried. "Certainly a small sturgeon." The professor examined the fish carefully, noting every characteristic. And he did not coincide in my opinion. The fish had a flat head, round body, and the lower extremities covered with bony scales. Its mouth was wholly without teeth. The pectoral fins, which were highly developed, sprouted direct from the body, which properly speaking had no tail. The animal certainly belonged to the order in which naturalists class the sturgeon, but it differed in essential particulars. My uncle, after all, was not mistaken. After a long and patient examination, he said, "This fish, my dear boy, belongs to a family which has been extinct for ages, and of which no trace has ever been found on Earth, except fossil remains in the Devonian strata." "You do not mean to say," I cried, "that we have captured a live specimen of a fish belonging to the primitive stock that existed before the deluge?" "We have," said the professor, continuing his observations, "and you may see by careful examination that these fossil fish have no identity with existing species to hold in one's hand. Therefore, a living specimen of the order is enough to make a naturalist happy for life." "But," cried I, "to what family does it belong?" "To the order of ganoids, an order of fish having angular scales, covered with bright enamel, forming one of the family of the cephalaspides, of the genus." "Well, sir," I remarked, as I noticed my uncle hesitated to conclude. "To the genus Pterichthys, yes, I am certain of it. Still, though I am confident of my surmise, this fish offers to our notice a remarkable peculiarity, never known to exist in any other fish but those which are the natives of subterranean waters, wells, lakes, in caverns, and such like hidden pools. And what may that be?" "It is blind," I cried, much surprised. "Not only blind," continued the professor, "but absolutely without organs of sight." I now examined our discovery for myself. It was singular, to be sure, but it was really a fact. This, however, might be a solitary instance, I suggested. The hook was baited again and thrown in. This subterranean ocean must have been tolerably well supplied with fish, for in 2 hours we took a large number of pterichthys, as well as other fish belonging to another supposed extinct family, the dipterides, though my uncle could not class it exactly. All, without exception, were blind. This unexpected capture enabled us to renew our stock of provisions in a very satisfactory way. We were now convinced that this subterranean sea contained only fish known to us as fossil specimens, and fish and reptiles alike were all the more perfect the farther back they dated their origin. We began to hope that we should find some of those saurians which science has succeeded in reconstructing from bits of bone or cartilage. I took up the telescope and carefully examined the horizon, looked over the whole sea. It was utterly and entirely deserted. Doubtless we were still too near the coast. After an examination of the ocean, I looked upward, towards the strange and mysterious sky. Why should not one of the birds reconstructed by the immortal Cuvier flap his stupendous wings aloft in the dull strata of subterranean air? It would, of course, find quite sufficient food from the fish in the sea. I gazed for some time upon the void above. It was as silent and as deserted as the shores we had but lately left. Nevertheless, though I could neither see nor discover anything, my imagination carried me away. Into wild hypotheses. I was in a kind of waking dream. I thought I saw on the surface of the water those enormous antediluvian turtles as big as floating islands. Upon those dull and somber shores passed a spectral row of the mammifers of early days. The great Leptotherium found in the cavernous hollow of the Brazilian hills, the Mesocotherium, a native of the glacial regions of Siberia. Farther on, the Pachydermatous Lophorodon, that gigantic tapir, concealed itself behind rocks, ready to do battle with the Anoplotherium, a singular animal partaking of the nature of the rhinoceros, the horse, the hippopotamus and the camel. There was the giant mastodon, twisting and turning his horrid trunk, with which he crushed the rocks of the shore to powder, while the Megatherium, his back raised like a cat in a passion, his enormous claws stretched out, dug into the earth for food, at the same time that he awoke the sonorous echoes of the whole place with his terrible roar. Higher up still, the first monkey ever seen on the face of the globe clambered up the granite hills. Still farther away ran the pterodactyl, with the winged hand, gliding, or rather sailing through the dense and compressed air like a huge bat. Above all, near the leaden granitic sky, were immense birds, more powerful than the cassowary and the ostrich. They spread their mighty wings and fluttered against the huge stone vault of the inland sea. I thought, such was the effect of my imagination, that I saw this whole tribe of antediluvian creatures. I carried myself back to far ages, long before man existed, when, in fact, the earth was in too imperfect a state for him to live upon it. My dream was of countless ages before the existence of man. The mammifers first disappeared, then the mighty birds, then the reptiles of the secondary period, presently the fish, the crustacea, the mollusks, and finally the vertebrata, the zoophytes of the period of transition in their turn sank into annihilation. The whole panorama of the world's life before the historic period seemed to be born over again, and mine was the only human heart that beat in this unpeopled world. There were no more seasons, there were no more climates. The natural heat of the world increased unceasingly and neutralized that of the great radiant sun. Vegetation was exaggerated in an extraordinary manner. I passed like a shadow in the midst of brushwood as lofty as the giant trees of California, and trod underfoot the moist and humid soil, reeking with a rank and varied vegetation. I leaned against the huge column-like trunks of giant trees, to which those of Canada were as ferns. Whole ages passed, hundreds upon hundreds of years concentrated into a single day. Next, unrolled before me like a panorama, came the great and wondrous series of terrestrial transformations. Plants disappeared, the granitic rocks lost all trace of solidity. The liquid state was suddenly substituted for that which had before existed. This was caused by intense heat acting on the organic matter of the earth. The waters flowed over the whole surface of the globe. They boiled, they were volatilized or turned into vapor. A kind of steam cloud wrapped the whole earth, the globe itself becoming at last one huge sphere of gas, indescribable in color, between white heat and red, as big and as brilliant as the sun. In the very center of this prodigious mass, 1,400,000 times as large as our globe, I was whirled round in space and brought into close conjunction with the planets. My body was subtilized, or rather became volatile, and commingled in a state of atomic vapor with the prodigious clouds, which rushed forward like a mighty comet into infinite space. What an extraordinary dream! Where would it finally take me? My feverish hand began to write down the marvelous details more like the imaginings of a lunatic than anything sober and real. I had during this period of hallucination forgotten everything: the professor, the guide, and the raft on which we were floating. My mind was in semi-oblivion. "What is the matter, Harry?" said my uncle suddenly. My eyes, which were wide open like those of a somnambulist, were fixed upon him, but I did not see him, nor could I clearly make out anything around me. "Take care, my boy," again cried my uncle. "You will fall into the sea." As he uttered these words, I felt myself seized on the other side by the firm hand of our devoted guide. Had it not been for the presence of mind of Hans, I must infallibly have fallen into the waves and been drowned. "Have you gone mad?" cried my uncle, shaking me. What is the matter?" I said at last, coming to myself. "Are you ill, Henry?" continued the professor in an anxious tone. No, but I have had an extraordinary dream. It, however, has passed away. All now seems well," I added, looking around me with puzzled eyes. "All right," said my uncle, "a beautiful breeze, a splendid sea. We are going along at a rapid rate, and if I am not out in my calculations, we shall soon see land. I shall not be sorry to exchange the narrow limits of our raft for the mysterious strand of the subterranean ocean." As my uncle uttered these words, I rose and carefully scanned the horizon. But the line of water was still confounded with the lowering clouds that hung aloft, and in the distance appeared to touch the edge of the water. Saturday, August 15th. The sea still retains its uniform monotony. The same leaden hue, the same eternal glare from above, no indication of land being in sight. The horizon appears to retreat before us, more and more as we advance. My head, still dull and heavy from the effects of my extraordinary dream, which I cannot as yet banish from my mind. The professor, who has not dreamed, is, however, in one of his morose and unaccountable humours, spends his time in scanning the horizon at every point of the compass. His telescope is raised every moment to his eyes, and when he finds nothing to give any clue to our whereabouts, he assumes a Napoleonic attitude and walks anxiously. I remarked that my uncle, the professor, had a strong tendency to resume his old impatient character, and I could not but make a note of this disagreeable circumstance in my journal. I saw clearly that it had required all the influence of my danger and suffering to extract from him one scintillation of humane feeling. Now that I was quite recovered, his original nature had conquered and obtained the upper hand. And, after all, what had he to be angry and annoyed about, now more than at any other time? Was not the journey being accomplished under the most favourable circumstances? Was not the raft progressing with the most marvellous rapidity? What, then, could be the matter? After one or two preliminary hems, I determined to inquire. "You seem uneasy, uncle," said I, when for about the 100th time he put down his telescope and walked up and down, muttering to himself. "No, I am not uneasy," he replied in a dry, harsh tone. "By no means." "Perhaps I should have said impatient," I replied, softening the force of my remark. "Enough to make me so, I think, and yet we are advancing at a rate seldom attained by a raft," I remarked. "What matters that?" cried my uncle. "I am not vexed at the rate we go at, but I am annoyed to find the sea so much vaster than I expected." I then recollected that the professor, before our departure, had estimated the length of this subterranean ocean as at most about 30 leagues. Now we had travelled at least over thrice that distance without discovering any trace of the distant shore. I began to understand my uncle's anger. "We are not going down," suddenly exclaimed the professor. "We are not progressing with our great discoveries. All this is utter loss of time. After all, I did not come from home to undertake a party of pleasure. This voyage on a raft over a pond annoys and wearies me." He called this adventurous journey a party of pleasure, and this great inland sea a pond. "But," argued I, If we have followed the route indicated by the great Saknussemm, we cannot be going far wrong. That is the question, as the great, the immortal Shakespeare has it. Are we following the route indicated by that wondrous sage? Did Saknussemm ever fall in with this great sheet of water? If he did he cross it? I begin to fear that the rivulet we adopted for a guide has led us wrong. In any case, we can never regret having come thus far. It is worth the whole journey to have enjoyed this magnificent spectacle. It is something to have seen. I care nothing about seeing, nor about magnificent spectacles. I came down into the interior of the earth with an object, and that object I mean to attain. Don't talk to me about admiring scenery or any other sentimental trash. After this I thought it well to hold my tongue and allow the professor to bite his lips until the blood came, without further remark. At 6 o'clock in the evening, our matter-of-fact guide, Hans, asked for his week's salary, and receiving his 3 Rixdollars, put them carefully in his pocket. He was perfectly contented and satisfied. Sunday, August 16th, nothing new to record. The same weather as before. The wind has a slight tendency to freshen up, with signs of an approaching gale. When I awoke, my first observation was in regard to the intensity of the light. I keep on fearing, day after day, that the extraordinary electric phenomenon should become first obscured and then go wholly out, leaving us in total darkness. Nothing, however, of the kind occurs. The shadow of the raft, its mast and sails, is clearly distinguished on the surface of the water. This wondrous sea is, after all, infinite in its extent. It must be quite as wide as the Mediterranean, or perhaps even as the great Atlantic Ocean. Why, after all, should it not be so? My uncle has on more than one occasion tried deep-sea soundings. He tied the cross of one of our heaviest crowbars to the extremity of a cord, which he allowed to run out to the extent of 200 fathoms. We had the greatest difficulty in hoisting in our novel kind of lead. When the crowbar was finally dragged on board, Hans called my attention to some singular marks upon its surface. The piece of iron looked as if it had been crushed between 2 very hard substances. I looked at our worthy guide with an inquiring glance. "Tanda," said he. Of course I was at a loss to understand. I turned round towards my uncle, absorbed in gloomy reflections. I had little wish to disturb him from his reverie. I accordingly turned once more towards our worthy Icelander. Hans very quietly and significantly opened his mouth once or twice, as if in the act of biting, and in this way made me understand his meaning. "Teeth," cried I, with stupefaction, as I examined the bar of iron. "Yes, there can be no doubt about the matter. The indentations on the bar of iron are the marks of teeth. What jaws must the owner of such molars be possessed of? Have we then come upon a monster of unknown species, which still exists within the vast waste of waters? A monster more voracious than a shark, more terrible and bulky than the whale? I am unable to withdraw my eyes from the bar of iron, actually half crushed. Is, then, my dream about to come true, a dread and terrible reality? All day my thoughts were bent upon these speculations, and my imagination scarcely regained a degree of calmness and power of reflection until after a sleep of many hours. This day, as on other Sundays, we observed as a day of rest and pious meditation. Monday, August 17th. I have been trying to realize from memory the particular instincts of those antediluvian animals of the secondary period, which, succeeding to the mollusca, to the crustacea, and to the fish, preceded the appearance of the race of mammifers. The generation of reptiles then reigned supreme upon the earth. These hideous monsters ruled everything in the seas of the secondary period, which formed the strata of which the Jura Mountains are composed. Nature had endowed them with perfect organization. What a gigantic structure was theirs! What vast and prodigious strength they possessed! The existing saurians, which include all such reptiles as lizards, crocodiles, and alligators, even the largest and most formidable of their class, are but feeble imitations of their mighty sires. The animals of ages long ago, if there were giants in the days of old, there were also gigantic animals. I shuddered as I evolved from my mind the idea and recollection of these awful monsters. No eye of man had seen them in the flesh. They took their walks abroad upon the face of the earth thousands of ages before man came into existence, and their fossil bones, discovered in the limestone, have allowed us to reconstruct them anatomically and thus to get some faint idea of their colossal formation. I recollect once seeing in the Great Museum of Hamburg the skeleton of one of these wonderful saurians. It measured no less than 30 feet from the nose to the tail. Am I, then, an inhabitant of the Earth of the present day, destined to find myself face to face with a representative of this antediluvian family? I can scarcely believe it possible. I can hardly believe it true. And yet these marks of powerful teeth upon the bar of iron. Can there be a doubt from their shape that the bite is the bite of a crocodile? My eyes stare wildly and with terror upon the subterranean sea. Every moment I expect one of these monsters to rise from its vast cavernous depths. I fancy that the worthy professor in some measure shares my notions, if not my fears, for, after an attentive examination of the crowbar, he cast his eyes rapidly over the mighty and mysterious ocean. What could possess him to leave the land? I thought, as if the depth of this water was of any importance to us. No doubt he has disturbed some terrible monster in his watery home, and perhaps we may pay dearly for our temerity. Anxious to be prepared for the worst, I examined our weapons and saw that they were in a fit state for use. My uncle looked on at me and nodded his head approvingly. He, too, has noticed what we have to fear. Already the uplifting of the waters on the surface indicates that something is in motion below. The danger approaches. It comes nearer and nearer. It behooves us to be on the watch. Tuesday, August 18th, evening came at last, the hour when the desire for sleep caused our eyelids to be heavy. Night there is not, properly speaking, in this place, any more than there is in summer in the Arctic regions. Hans, however, is immovable at the rudder. When he snatches a moment of rest I really cannot say. I take advantage of his vigilance to take some little repose. But 2 hours after I was awakened from a heavy sleep by an awful shock, the raft appeared to have struck upon a sunken rock. It was lifted right out of the water by some wondrous and mysterious power, and then started off 20 fathoms distant. "Eh, what is it?" cried my uncle, starting up. "Are we shipwrecked, or what?" Hans raised his hand and pointed to where, about 200 yards off, a large black mass was moving up and down. I looked with awe. My worst fears were realized. "It is a colossal monster," I cried, clasping my hands. "Yes," cried the agitated professor, "and there yonder is a huge sea lizard of terrible size and shape, and farther on behold a prodigious crocodile. Look at his hideous jaws, and that row of monstrous teeth. Ha, he is gone." "A whale," shouted the professor. "I can see her enormous fins. See, how she blows air and water." Two liquid columns rose to a vast height above the level of the sea, into which they fell with a terrific crash, waking up the echoes of that awful place. We stood still, surprised, stupefied, terror-stricken at the sight of this group of fearful marine monsters, more hideous in the reality than in my dream. They were of supernatural dimensions. The very smallest of the whole party could have crushed our raft with a single bite. Hans, seizing the rudder which had flown out of his hand, puts it hard aweather in order to escape from such dangerous vicinity. But no sooner does he do so than he finds he is flying from Scylla to Charybdis. To leeward is a turtle about 40 feet wide, and a serpent quite as long, with an enormous and hideous head peering from out the waters. Look which way we will, it is impossible for us to fly. The fearful reptiles advanced upon us. They turned and twisted about the raft with awful rapidity. They formed around our devoted vessel a series of concentric circles. I took up my rifle in desperation. But what effect can a rifle ball produce upon the armor scales with which the bodies of these horrid monsters are covered? We remain still and dumb from utter horror. They advance upon us, nearer and nearer. Our fate appears certain, fearful and terrible. On one side the mighty crocodile, on the other the great sea serpent. The rest of the fearful crowd of marine prodigies have plunged beneath the briny waves and disappeared. I am about to fire at any risk and try the effect of a shot. Hans, however, interfered by a sign to check me. The two hideous and ravenous monsters passed within 50 fathoms of the raft and then made a rush at one another, their fury preventing them from seeing us. The combat commenced. We distinctly made out every action of the two hideous monsters. But to my excited imagination, the other animals appeared about to take part in the fierce and deadly struggle: the monster, the whale, the lizard, and the turtle. I distinctly saw them every moment. I pointed them out to the Icelander. But he only shook his head. "For," he said. "What to only does he say? Surely he is mistaken," I cried in a tone of wonder. "He is quite right," replied my uncle coolly and philosophically, examining the terrible duel with his telescope and speaking as if he were in a lecture room. "How can that be? Yes, it is so. The first of these hideous monsters has the snout of a porpoise, the head of a lizard, the teeth of a crocodile, and it is this that has deceived us. It is the most fearful of all antediluvian reptiles, the world-renowned ichthyosaurus or great fish lizard, and the other is a monstrous serpent, concealed under the hard vaulted shell of the turtle, the terrible enemy of its fearful rival, the plesiosaurus or sea crocodile." Hans was quite right. The two monsters only disturbed the surface of the sea. At last have mortal eyes gazed upon two reptiles of the great primitive ocean. I see the flaming red eyes of the ichthyosaurus, each as big or bigger than a man's head. Nature in its infinite wisdom had gifted this wondrous marine animal with an optical apparatus of extreme power, capable of resisting the pressure of the heavy layers of water which rolled over him in the depths of the ocean where he usually fed. It has by some authors truly been called the whale of the saurian race, for it is as big and quick in its motions as our king of the seas. This one measures not less than 100 feet in length, and I can form some idea of his girth when I see him lift his prodigious tail out of the waters. His jaw is of awful size and strength, and according to the best informed naturalists, it does not contain less than 182 teeth. The other was the mighty plesiosaurus, a serpent with a cylindrical trunk, with a short stumpy tail, with fins like a bank of oars in a Roman galley, its whole body covered by a carapace or shell, and its neck, as flexible as that of a swan, rose more than 30 feet above the waves, a tower of animated flesh. These animals attacked one another with inconceivable fury. Such a combat was never seen before by mortal eyes, and to us who did see it, it appeared more like the phantasmagoric creation of a dream than anything else. They raised mountains of water, which dashed in spray over the raft, already tossed to and fro by the waves. 20 times we seemed on the point of being upset and hurled headlong into the waves. Hideous hisses appeared to shake the gloomy granite roof of that mighty cavern, hisses which carried terror to our hearts. The awful combatants held each other in a tight embrace. I could not make out one from the other, still the combat could not last forever. And woe unto us, whichsoever became the victor. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours passed away, without any decisive result. The struggle continued with the same deadly tenacity, but without apparent result. The deadly opponents now approached, now drew away from the raft. Once or twice we fancied they were about to leave us altogether, but instead of that, they came nearer and nearer. We crouched on the raft ready to fire at them at a moment's notice, poor as the prospect of hurting or terrifying them was. Still we were determined not to perish without a struggle. Suddenly the ichthyosaurus and the plesiosaurus disappeared beneath the waves, leaving behind them a maelstrom in the midst of the sea. We were nearly drawn down by the indraft of the water. Several minutes elapsed before anything was again seen. Was this wonderful combat to end in the depths of the ocean? Was the last act of this terrible drama to take place without spectators? It was impossible for us to say. Suddenly, at no great distance from us, an enormous mass rises out of the waters, the head of the great plesiosaurus. The terrible monster is now wounded unto death. I can see nothing now of his enormous body. All that could be distinguished was his serpent-like neck, which he twisted and curled in all the agonies of death. Now he struck the waters with it like a gigantic whip, and then again wriggled like a worm cut in two. The water was spurted up to a great distance in all directions. A great portion of it swept over our raft and nearly blinded us. But soon the end of the beast approached nearer and nearer. His movements slackened visibly, his contortions almost ceased, and at last the body of the mighty snake lay an inert, dead mass on the surface of the now calm and placid waters. As for the ichthyosaurus, has he gone down to his mighty cavern under the sea to rest, or will he reappear to destroy us? This question remained unanswered, and we had breathing time. Wednesday, August 19th. Fortunately, the wind, which for the present blows with some violence, has allowed us to escape from the scene of the unparalleled and extraordinary struggle. Hans, with his usual imperturbable calm, remained at the helm. My uncle, who for a short time had been withdrawn from his absorbing reveries by the novel incidents of this sea fight, fell back again apparently into a brown study. His eyes were fixed impatiently on the widespread ocean. Our voyage now became monotonous and uniform. Dull as it has become, I have no desire to have it broken by any repetition of the perils and adventures of yesterday. Thursday, August 20th. The wind is now NNE and blows very irregularly. It is changed to fitful gusts. The temperature is exceedingly high. We are now progressing at the average rate of about 10 miles and a half per hour. About 12 o'clock, a distant sound as of thunder fell upon our ears. I make a note of the fact without even venturing a suggestion as to its cause. It was one continued roar as of a sea falling over mighty rocks. Far off in the distance, said the professor dogmatically, there is some rock or some island, against which the sea, lashed to fury by the wind, is breaking violently. Hans, without saying a word, clambered to the top of the mast, but could make out nothing. The ocean was level in every direction as far as the eye could reach. 3 hours passed away without any sign to indicate what might be before us. The sound began to assume that of a mighty cataract. I expressed my opinion on this point strongly to my uncle. He merely shook his head. I, however, am strongly impressed by a conviction that I am not wrong. Are we advancing towards some mighty waterfall which shall cast us into the abyss? Probably this mode of descending into the abyss may be agreeable to the professor, because it would be something like the vertical descent he is so eager to make. I entertain a very different opinion. Whatever be the truth, it is certain that not many leagues distant there must be some very extraordinary phenomenon, for as we advance the roar becomes something mighty and stupendous. Is it in the water or in the air? I cast hasty glances aloft at the suspended vapours, and I seek to penetrate their mighty depths, but the vault above is tranquil. The clouds, which are now elevated to the very summit, appear utterly still and motionless, and completely lost in the irradiation of electric light. It is necessary, therefore, to seek for the cause of this phenomenon elsewhere. I examine the horizon, now perfectly calm, pure, and free from all haze. Its aspect still remains unchanged. But if this awful noise proceeds from a cataract, if this vast interior ocean is precipitated into a lower basin, if these tremendous roars are produced by the noise of falling waters, the current would increase in activity, and its increasing swiftness would give me some idea of the extent of the peril with which we are menaced. I consult the current. It simply does not exist. There is no such thing. An empty bottle cast into the water lies to leeward without motion. About 4 o'clock, Hans rises, clambers up the mast, and reaches the truck itself from this elevated position. His looks are cast around. They take in a vast circumference of the ocean. At last, his eyes remain fixed. His face expresses no astonishment, but his eyes slightly dilate. He has seen something at last, cried my uncle. I think so, I replied. Hans came down, stood beside us, and pointed with his right hand to the south. Du nere, he said. There, replied my uncle. And seizing his telescope, he looked at it with great attention for about a minute, which to me appeared an age. I knew not what to think or expect. Yes, yes, he cried in a tone of considerable surprise. There it is. What? I asked. A tremendous spurt of water rising out of the waves. Some other marine monster, I cried, already alarmed. Perhaps. Then let us steer more to the westward, for we know what we have to expect from antediluvian animals, was my eager reply. Go ahead, said my uncle. I turned towards Hans. Hans was at the tiller steering with his usual imperturbable calm. Nevertheless, if from the distance which separated us from this creature, a distance which must be estimated at not less than a dozen leagues, one could see the column of water spurting from the blowhole of the great animal, his dimensions must be something preternatural. To flyers, therefore, the course to be suggested by ordinary prudence. But we have not come into that part of the world to be prudent. Such is my uncle's determination. We, accordingly, continued to advance. The nearer we come, the loftier is the spouting water. What monster can fill himself with such huge volumes of water and then unceasingly spout them out in such lofty jets? At 8 o'clock in the evening, reckoning as above ground, where there is day and night, we are not more than 2 leagues from the mighty beast. Its long, black, enormous, mountainous body lies on the top of the water like an island. But then sailors have been said to have gone ashore on sleeping whales, mistaking them for land. Is it illusion, or is it fear? Its length cannot be less than 1,000 fathoms. What, then, is this cetaceous monster of which no Cuvier ever thought? It is quite motionless and presents the appearance of sleep. The sea seems unable to lift him upwards. It is rather the waves which break on his huge and gigantic frame. The waterspout, rising to a height of 500 feet, breaks in spray with a dull, sullen roar. We advance, like senseless lunatics, towards this mighty mass. I honestly confess that I was abjectly afraid. I declared that I would go no farther. I threatened in my terror to cut the sheet of the sail. I attacked the professor with considerable acrimony, calling him foolhardy, mad, I know not what. He made no answer. Suddenly the imperturbable Hans once more pointed his finger to the menacing object. "Home, an island," cried my uncle, "an island." I replied, shrugging my shoulders at this poor attempt at deception. "Of course it is," cried my uncle, bursting into a loud and joyous laugh. "But the waterspout, geyser," said Hans. "Yes, of course a geyser," replied my uncle, still laughing, "a geyser like those common in Iceland. Jets like this are the great wonders of the country." At first I would not allow that I had been so grossly deceived. What could be more ridiculous than to have taken an island for a marine monster? But kick as one may, one must yield to evidence. And I was finally convinced of my error. It was nothing, after all, but a natural phenomenon. As we approached nearer and nearer, the dimensions of the liquid sheaf of waters became truly grand and stupendous. The island had, at a distance, presented the appearance of an enormous whale, whose head rose high above the waters. The geyser, a word the Icelanders pronounce geysir, and which signifies fury, rose majestically from its summit. Dull detonations are heard every now and then, and the enormous jet, taken as it were with sudden fury, shakes its plume of vapor and bounds into the first layer of the clouds. It is alone, neither spurts of vapor nor hot springs surround it. And the whole volcanic power of that region is concentrated in one sublime column. The rays of electric light mix with this dazzling sheaf, every drop as it falls assuming the prismatic colors of the rainbow. "Let us go on shore," said the professor, after some minutes of silence. "It is necessary, however, to take great precaution, in order to avoid the weight of falling waters, which would cause the raft to founder in an instant." Hans, however, steers admirably, and brings us to the other extremity of the island. I was the first to leap on the rock. My uncle followed, while the eider duck hunter remained still, like a man above any childish sources of astonishment. We were now walking on granite mixed with silicious sandstone. The soil shivered under our feet like the sides of boilers in which overheated steam is forcibly confined. "It is burning." We soon came in sight of the little central basin from which rose the geyser. I plunged a thermometer into the water, which ran bubbling from the center, and it marked a heat of 163 degrees. This water, therefore, came from some place where the heat was intense. This was singularly in contradiction with the theories of Professor Hardwick. I could not help telling him my opinion on the subject. "Well," said he sharply, "and what does this prove against my doctrine?" "Nothing," replied I dryly, seeing that I was running my head against a foregone conclusion. "Nevertheless, I am compelled to confess that until now we have been most remarkably fortunate, and that this voyage is being accomplished in most favorable conditions of temperature. But it appears evident, in fact, certain, that we shall sooner or later arrive at one of those regions where the central heat will reach its utmost limits and will go far beyond all the possible gradations of thermometers. Visions of the Hades of the ancients, believed to be in the center of the earth, floated through my imagination. We shall, however, see what we shall see. That is the professor's favorite phrase now. Having christened the volcanic island by the name of his nephew, the leader of the expedition turned away and gave the signal for embarkation. I stood still, however, for some minutes, gazing upon the magnificent geyser. I soon was able to perceive that the upward tendency of the water was irregular. Now it diminished in intensity, and then, suddenly, it regained new vigor, which I attributed to the variation of the pressure of the accumulated vapors in its reservoir. At last we took our departure, going carefully round the projecting, and rather dangerous, rocks of the southern side. Hans had taken advantage of this brief halt to repair the raft. Before we took our final departure from the island, however, I made some observations to calculate the distance we had gone over, and I put them down in my journal. Since we left Port Gretchen, we had travelled 270 leagues, more than 800 miles. On this great inland sea, we were, therefore, 620 leagues from Iceland, and exactly under England. Friday, August 21st, this morning the magnificent geyser had wholly disappeared. The wind had freshened up, and we were fast leaving the neighbourhood of Henry's Island. Even the roaring sound of the mighty column was lost to the ear. You are watching a video on the Good Stories channel. Please subscribe and like to support the channel, thank you. The weather, if, under the circumstances, we may use such an expression, is about to change very suddenly. The atmosphere is being gradually loaded with vapours, which carry with them the electricity formed by the constant evaporation of the saline waters. The clouds are slowly but sensibly falling towards the sea, and are assuming a dark olive texture. The electric rays can scarcely pierce through the opaque curtain, which has fallen like a drop seen before this wondrous theatre, on the stage of which another and terrible drama is soon to be enacted. This time it is no fight of animals, it is the fearful battle of the elements. I feel that I am very peculiarly influenced, as all creatures are on land when a deluge is about to take place. The cumuli, a perfectly oval kind of cloud, piled upon the south, presented a most awful and sinister appearance, with the pitiless aspect often seen before a storm. The air is extremely heavy, the sea is comparatively calm. In the distance, the clouds have assumed the appearance of enormous balls of cotton, or rather pods, piled one above the other in picturesque confusion. By degrees, they appear to swell out, break, and gain in number what they lose in grandeur. Their heaviness is so great that they are unable to lift themselves from the horizon. But under the influence of the upper currents of air, they are gradually broken up, become much darker, and then present the appearance of one single layer of a formidable character. Now and then a lighter cloud, still lit up from above, rebounds upon this grey carpet, and is lost in the opaque mass. There can be no doubt that the entire atmosphere is saturated with electric fluid. I am myself wholly impregnated. My hairs literally stand on end as if under the influence of a galvanic battery. If one of my companions ventured to touch me, I think he would receive rather a violent and unpleasant shock. About 10 o'clock in the morning, the symptoms of the storm became more thorough and decisive. The wind appeared to soften down as if to take breath for a renewed attack. The vast funereal pall above us looked like a huge bag like the cave of Aeolus, in which the storm was collecting its forces for the attack. I tried all I could not to believe in the menacing signs of the sky, and yet I could not avoid saying, as it were involuntarily, "I believe we are going to have bad weather." The professor made me no answer. He was in a detestable humour to see the ocean stretching interminably before his eyes. On hearing my words, he simply shrugged his shoulders. "We shall have a tremendous storm," I said again, pointing to the horizon. "These clouds are falling lower and lower upon the sea, as if to crush it." A great silence prevailed. The wind wholly ceased. Nature assumed a dead calm, and ceased to breathe. Upon the mast, where I noticed a sort of slight ignis fatuus, the sail hangs in loose heavy folds. The raft is motionless in the midst of a dark heavy sea without undulation, without motion. It is as still as glass. But as we are making no progress, what is the use of keeping up the sail, which may be the cause of our perdition if the tempest should suddenly strike us without warning? "Let us lower the sail," I said. "It is only an act of common prudence." "No, no," cried my uncle, in an exasperated tone, 100 times, "no. Let the wind strike us and do its worst. Let the storm sweep us away where it will only let me see the glimmer of some coast of some rocky cliffs, even if they dash our raft into 1,000 pieces. No, Keep up the sail no matter what happens. These words were scarcely uttered when the southern horizon underwent a sudden and violent change. The long accumulated vapors were resolved into water, and the air required to fill up the void produced became a wild and raging tempest. It came from the most distant corners of the mighty cavern. It raged from every point of the compass. It roared, it yelled. It shrieked with glee as of demons let loose. The darkness increased and became indeed darkness visible. The raft rose and fell with the storm and bounded over the waves. My uncle was cast headlong upon the deck. I with great difficulty dragged myself towards him. He was holding on with might and main to the end of a cable, and appeared to gaze with pleasure and delight at the spectacle of the unchained elements. Hans never moved a muscle, his long hair driven hither and thither by the tempest and scattered wildly over his motionless face, gave him a most extraordinary appearance, for every single hair was illuminated by little sparkling sprigs. His countenance presents the extraordinary appearance of an antediluvian man, a true contemporary of the megatherium. Still the mast holds good against the storm. The sail spreads out and feels like a soap bubble about to burst. The raft rushes on at a pace impossible to estimate, but still less swiftly than the body of water displaced beneath it, the rapidity of which may be seen by the lines which fly right and left in the wake. The sail, I cried, making a trumpet of my hands, and then endeavouring to lower it. Let it alone, said my uncle, more exasperated than ever. Nedge, said Hans, gently shaking his head. Nevertheless, the rain formed a roaring cataract before this horizon of which we were in search, and to which we were rushing like madmen. But before this wilderness of waters reached us, the mighty veil of cloud was torn in twain, the sea began to foam wildly, and the electricity, produced by some vast and extraordinary chemical action in the upper layer of cloud, is brought into play. To the fearful claps of thunder I added dazzling flashes of lightning, such as I had never seen. The flashes crossed one another, hurled from every side. While the thunder came pealing like an echo, the mass of vapor becomes incandescent. The hailstones which strike the metal of our boots and our weapons are actually luminous. The waves as they rise appear to be fire-eating monsters, beneath which seethes an intense fire, their crests surmounted by cones of flame. My eyes are dazzled, blinded by the intensity of light. My ears are deafened by the awful roar of the elements. I am compelled to hold onto the mast, which bends like a reed beneath the violence of the storm, to which none ever before seen by mariners bore any resemblance. Here my travelling notes become very incomplete, loose and vague. I have only been able to make out one or two fugitive observations, jotted down in a mere mechanical way. But even their brevity, even their obscurity, show the emotions which overcame me. -1, August 23rd. Where have we got to? In what region are we wandering? We are still carried forward with inconceivable rapidity. The night has been fearful, something not to be described. The storm shows no signs of cessation. We exist in the midst of an uproar which has no name. The detonations as of artillery are incessant. Our ears literally bleed. We are unable to exchange a word or hear each other speak. The lightning never ceases to flash for a single instant. I can see the zigzags after a rapid dart strike the arched roof of this mightiest of mighty vaults. If it were to give way and fall upon us, other lightnings plunge their forked streaks in every direction and take the form of globes of fire, which explode like bombshells over a beleaguered city. The general crash and roar do not apparently increase. It has already gone far beyond what human ear can appreciate. If all the powder magazines in the world were to explode together, it would be impossible for us to hear worse noise. There is a constant emission of light from the storm clouds. The electric matter is incessantly released. Evidently, the gaseous principles of the air are out of order. Innumerable columns of water rush up like waterspouts and fall back upon the surface of the ocean in foam. Whither are we going? My uncle still lies at full length upon the raft, without speaking, without taking any note of time. The heat increases. I look at the thermometer. To my surprise, it indicates the exact figure is here rubbed out in my manuscript. Monday, August 24th. This terrible storm will never end. Why should not this state of the atmosphere, so dense and murky, once modified, again remain definitive? You have just finished watching part 3 of the story Journey to the Center of the Earth. Thank you for listening. Goodbye and see you again in video part 4. Goodbye.